And we are live. So, welcome to Heart with Saima. We hope to bring you stories, and we hope to bring talk about things which are literally happening to me or to people listening, and just talk about different things which we hope, as I change my life. I hope that we can help other people who might be going through some, perhaps even transitions where they're trying to figure out what's going on in their life or their children's life or changes you're going through in your own life. And with me, I have my wonderful co-host Ashok, and Ashok comes first Tuesday of every month, and we are missing Nancy today. She's with us every first Tuesday of the month, and we hope that we talk about things where we can change our own lives, and at the same time we can help others as well. How are you, Ashok?
I'm okay, but I'm quite reflective these days, and I think that one of the reasons for that is that we're coming up to the festive time of the year, and we're also coming to a different stage in the pandemic as well. And lots of people, especially people in home environments, who've been struggling. Some of them have been struggling with their relationships because people have been so much closer together now than they've ever been before, almost smushed together. A colleague of mine called this social claustrophobia, which means that we're further together rather than further apart than we've ever been before in our home environments.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you could comment on that vis-a-vis what's happening with close relationships, especially issues around marriages and especially around issues of divorce.
I feel that uh, s- I went through my divorce earlier this year, and 2020, when we started that, being quarantined inside our house. So we kind of started with where we were. See, now it could vary from person to person.
Mhm.
For myself, uh, you know. Um, I have my extreme sides. One side, which is very materialistic, but then I have my other very homely side, where I love to have the best time that I spend is for my family to be together, and for my girls, and for us to sit and have our meal together. And just for that, those 30 minutes, I'm filled with gratitude to be able to spend that time. So we actually started doing that in 2020. We started spending that time with each other. We had Thursdays where we would sit as a family, and we had an open table where any, where anyone could say whatever they wanted to say. There was no restriction on what would come out of the mouth. Was no restriction on what language is being. It was just this uninhibited zone where you could be yourself, and you could express your emotions in any way you choose to do so. So it gave an opportunity to my daughters to express their feelings and what they felt. Even initially it was very difficult for me, and it was like, oh my god, I'm sitting and I'm being just bombarded and just hit left and right with all these strong emotions from my daughters. But with time it just started getting better and better, because they started to heal. They found that it was an outlet for them to be able to express themselves and articulate anything that they felt, and without being without being told that, hey, you can't talk to your parents that way, hey, what are you saying, we have done this for you, we have done. So the roles kind of changed. Instead of us just sitting there being in that parent mode, where we as parents are like, we are parents, so we automatically are right about everything. I have We came to realize that your children are actually your mirrors. They're kind of these people who have been sent into your life, so you could learn from them. They stand there facing you in adversity. They stand there, defiant, and they tell you, hey, parents, you're wrong about this. You know what? this is where you've messed up, fix this or fix that. So I felt, these were things that I was taking from that time when we were being quarantined. So I actually did enjoy that time, and we were healing as a family. And I think some of that healing also brought with it the fact that um, it's okay for relationships to come to an end, and it's okay for um, it just taught me a whole lot. And I perhaps you can shed some more light on, because I don't do anything that normal people do. I'm very unconventional, and I just, if most people are going in this direction, I will go in the opposite direction automatically.
Well, maybe the way I would put that is that you're a strong person with a sense of independence and a strong mind. I mean, culturally, you and I come from cultures that can be somewhat oppressive to individuality. And I was lucky. My dad left Dhaka, which is in Bangladesh, to go to Calcutta or Kolkata, and then eventually came to England, and then came to Canada. And I always think, what would have happened if he'd just stayed in Bangladesh? And if I'd been born in Bangladesh, okay, that might have been a slightly different life than being born in England and then coming over to Canada, to this great big expansive wealthy nation that we live in, North America. So I think the freedom of expression
Hmm.
is something that we've gradually allowed ourselves to acquire. When we were children, kids had to be seen and not heard, perhaps, and
Yeah.
our opinions were relevant to us, but maybe not relevant to our elders until we became adults ourselves.
Hmm.
I was also lucky in the sense that I grew up in a family that was quite bohemian. In other words, we were allowed to be artistic and expressions, and I did all kinds of things. I was a ballet dancer. Did you know that? I was
Yeah.
a figure skater. I was a swimmer. I did karate. I'm a musician. So we did all
Very
these things
yeah, very
to
creative.
be able to express ourselves, and I was very, very, very lucky,
Yeah.
because a lot of people can kind of get raised in this kind of situation, where they're not allowed to see, hear, or speak any evil.
Yeah.
Otherwise, these are the three monkeys. Otherwise, they're going to get into trouble. And I think that it's very important that, especially in our generation, that we encourage our children to feel free with their thoughts and feelings on the inside. Because every time we bottle that up, where does it go?
Yeah.
Well, it goes into our soul. And where does that go? It goes into our heart. And where does that go? It goes into our mind. And it can actually poison us if we don't have the capacity to have that freedom. And that's what I noticed when I began to meet and work with you, is how free you are as a human being and how you've liberated yourself from that. And I think you should be proud of that, Simon.
Thank you. And I can always, Ashok, I always give credit uh, for that individuality to my parents, because one, I was given, even growing up in Pakistan, in Karachi, I was given unconditional love. I could. My father was had a temper, and everyone in his whole family knew that my dad had a bad temper. But I could stand there and be defiant with my dad, and I would stand there like that, and I would say, hey, you cannot talk to my mom this way, or you cannot do that, or you cannot do this. And there would be times when he would be shaking in anger, but he always let me express myself, let me be who I was. Um, so much of it. And the other thing, and I literally use myself as like, I think that, okay, what was it that went right? What was it, the way my parents, or how they raised me, for me to be able to be the person that I've become, who is willing to listen to others, and who has a certain sense of empathy, even with how I went through my divorce, even right now. I these are difficult times. There's so much adjustment happening, but even then, I have empathy for my ex-husband, and I still wish him the best. And I spent my Thanksgiving with his family and with them. And I told his family, hey, you know what? Whether you agree or you don't agree with his decision, you still have, he's still your family, and you need to be there for him. So I think so much of it does come from the fact that my my failures, even growing up, were not something that were strongly reprimanded by my parents. They wouldn't be like, "Oh my God, you failed here or you failed there. What did you do? Your grades are terrible." I mean, I was a terrible student growing up. I mean, really, and I was a terrible student. I did not want to study. I did want to just play and climb trees and, whatnot all the time. So it was, but my parents would be like, okay. And I did my O levels and I did my A levels. So now I was in a school where there was very strong education. So, and then I was amongst a group of girls who were, at least 40% of them were just brilliant girls doing extremely well. So it wasn't easy being in that competitive environment, and teachers with these extremely high expectations, because we had to prepare to eventually take our exams through the University of Cambridge, or some from University of London or Oxford. So we really had to work hard and work our ass off. But regardless of all that, it was, my parents were like, okay, you know what, you failed, but you gotta get up. You gotta, if this is what you want to do, then you have to try harder. They were very gentle in their approach. So I think good came from it. The bad was that I think even now, um, I'm still searching. My soul is still searching. I'm still searching. I don't know if that's coming from that or not, but I'm still searching. I'm still trying to find that thing which, even being a realtor, I've done real estate for 17 years, and I love what I do, but I'm still searching.
What you're describing to me is tolerance. And I think if you and I were born 1,000 years ago, the story may not be the same. There might be some differences. If we were born 100,000 years ago, it would be very different. And I think what we're describing to a certain degree is tolerance. And, I had a lot of intolerance when I was growing up in England in the 60s. My family was a mixed family, and mixed families in the 60s in England were frowned upon very, very seriously. And when those mixed families started to create children, those children were frowned on even more, because we were essentially a contamination of the British Empire. And so we were told all kinds of terrible things, and because there was very significant intolerance. And thankfully, and this is what I think you're implying as well, our parents had the capacity to realize that we are their future. Our children are our future. Our grandchildren are our future. And my parents, thankfully, said, "Well, let's cross this pond and go to Canada," where we had much more tolerance of us as a family, and us as a group. And it all changed, and we had opportunities. And what you're describing, I think, is that your heart and soul may not have been aligned with the way the school was being expected, the kinds of studies you were supposed to do. And so it's not that you failed, it's that it didn't align with who you were. And that's one of the hardest things to do with our children, is, especially with education, is how can we educate a child If a child learns like this
Yeah,
and the school is like this, then that's aligning. But if the child learns like this,
yeah,
but the school is like this, there's going to be a mismatch. And we have a lot of examples of people who are geniuses who failed school
yeah.
because it just didn't align with the way they were. And I think this part might be a better explanation for why you experienced some of the freedoms that you did, especially in some of the complexities of the cultural issues, and then finally come to this country, in your case in the United States. And tolerance, I think, is something that we still have to keep working on as a species. Tolerance of nature, tolerance of ourselves, and tolerance of each other.
Yeah, and I think that's what most people have a problem with is tolerance. Is tolerance for other people's religions, tolerance for anyone who is different than you, tolerance for anyone who looks different than you, tolerance for anyone who thinks differently than you. You
That's right.
know, so I think that is. I know that that's what my children are teaching me, but I know that that is what my parents allowed me to be that person. When I've always had friends over at my house because there was always a certain level of freedom. Whatever I would ask my dad, can you take us here or there? My parents would always take us, and I think it was that freedom where everyone wanted to be there because my parents were they were always ready and willing to go the extra mile for the children. And I think that right there just gave me that space if to evolve and eventually become just true to just follow my heart and be true to myself. I mean,
But
that's
let,
never.
let me let me just ask you a question. You don't have to answer if this makes you uncomfortable.
Mhm.
But the question is two parts. One, what did your parents define as success, and what do you define as your success?
Um, I think I've constantly been evolving. How I define, I've never really, I've never, you know, I've I've always let myself be satisfied and content and happy in whatever space I'm in, and perhaps to me that is success. Um, I've it's difficult to answer. I'll have to think about it. But I think
Well, I grew up with a fairly typical Indian father who wanted me to get a certain grade in school, do certain studies. Luckily he was a doctor, right? So I became a doctor. I didn't become a doctor because he was a doctor. I think he was a doctor and I became a doctor. I had tremendous respect for him as a doctor. My mom was a mental health worker as well. She was one of Canada's first art therapists, working in mental health issues. And so I was surrounded by the beautiful tolerance of mental wellness and mental illness, and they were extremely compassionate and empathic people towards mental illness. And that's a profound gift they gave to me because I was raised in that ever since I was a child. And it sort of became obvious for me that their definitions of success for me was to achieve a certain place in society and a certain place in my life. But my definitions as I've grown a bit older is to be content. And I know that that requires a certain amount of money and a certain amount of friendships and a certain the right location, as you might say. But at the same time, that location also has to be in here,
yeah.
in your heart and your soul. Because if you're in the wrong place there, you cannot be a successful person. And you know this so well because
I'm
you're successful for many measures of success, but there must be things still that you're looking for that I'm sensing in you that
and
will
I
need
am.
to fit in, need to come back into place for you to feel that sense for yourself.
So, Ashok, my ex-husband was a very content person. He was a yogi. He did meditative yoga like for 30 years. So he was in always in a very peaceful, content space. I think the best thing that I took that he the best gift that my ex-husband gave me, he taught me to hug my father because of being raised in that environment. In our culture, there's not a lot of we don't show affection a whole lot, we don't display affection a whole lot. But what my ex-husband did teach me was to because he would just hug my father, and I learned to hug my father because I watched him. And then I would just like hug my dad, and just like my dad would just with all his heart. And I'm he loves me tremendously. Out of all the three, I have two older brothers, but I was the spoiled one. And so I think that right there was something so priceless that my ex-husband gave me, this love, and that I could just transport, let my father feel how I and embrace him. So but he was very content. And I was taught while growing up, and literally even as of this morning when I was speaking to my mom, to always just be grateful, this gratitude, just to be grateful, just to be grateful, just to be. So I think one of the things that did for me was it just made me a very content person. No matter what hardships or highs and lows in life that I experienced, we went through multiple financial losses, and we took a huge financial hit just a couple of not couple but a few years after getting married. In 2000, we had just bought a huge business, put all our savings, everything. 9/11 happened, my daughter had just been born, and 9/11 happened, and our business just fell completely apart. And we took a huge loss, and it was financial, emotional, mental. So I think going through all those, all those highs and lows in our marital life, the one thing which was there is I was just always, I was content. And I feel that perhaps, you know um, I was perhaps that contentment went into complacency, because there's a fine line between being content and being complacent. And
Well, okay. So now you got me going on this. Human beings need to keep growing. We need to keep evolving with our experiences, with our knowledge base, and with our relationships. So there's always growth that's happening as we move forward in life. What happens if we're stagnant for too long? And this happens in any situation, whether people have unlimited wealth or not. If they're stagnant for too long, they get bored, and then they start to get irritated. And when they get irritated, they start to pick on each other. And when they start to pick on each other, they get more irritated. And this is how they can sometimes get um, a loving, contenting situation can actually begin to get disruptive. And if you don't know what I mean, I've played in a number of rock bands in my life. And it's very hard if you're playing in a rock band. This happens all the time with very successful rock bands, is they spend far too much time just together in hotels, on the road, in buses, in planes. And after 3 to 4 years, a lot of them can't stay together anymore because they've been doing that, irritating each other for too long. And if they're not growing, and it's very rare that people grow at the same rate as well, especially in relationships, then that can cause friction as well. So I think the challenge that you're describing is that, if everything just stayed the same and nothing changed and we're just going forward, it would have been fine. Well, life is never like that. You know that very well. Nothing stays the same.
Yeah.
I was uh, I was 18 when I came home, and my mom said she has cancer, and she died 12 years later. And so who would have thought that was going to happen? But it did. And when that happened, that not only changed our family dynamic, it changed the way that friction and tension was dealt with in the house. So you raised a really important point about when families or organizations or businesses are moving, they have to keep growing, because the minute they stop, they're going to start to have that trouble. Do you agree with me or no?
Yes. And I wish I would have known that, you know. Um, uh, I wish I would have known that there's a difference between gratitude and between contentment and complacency. And, but I think that's okay, because, you know, life just teaches you different lessons. Even if you're complacent, life hits you in different directions, hits you from different directions, and it forces you to evolve if you're not evolving yourself on your own.
Well, I think about water. So we've got ponds and lakes and streams and oceans, and then it becomes the rain. So water in general is always moving, and so is a stream. But if you look at a little pond, that can dry up. And when it dries up, that's what happens with complacency. Everything in that pond will dry up too, including if there's things living in that pond. And the goal is to not end up being a pond where you're totally reliant on rain, essentially, to keep yourself going. And this is what people often don't realize, especially people who get married in our culture. They get married, and they kind of think that it's like a no maintenance battery in your car. It's just going to look after itself. Well, guess what?
Yeah.
You need to look after your marriage the minute it starts, and every day thereafter in some small way to
Yeah.
keep it going.
It requires effort on both people's part. So how does one deal with the after, the once you go through a divorce? How do you heal? What advice do you give to people? um uh, I for them to recover, for them to recuperate from the trauma that they have gone through.
Well, let me say a few things that just to put a frame around this. Marriage is not a normal thing. It's an abnormal thing, in the sense that human beings are not really particularly designed to get married to one person for 60 years. It's an artificial establishment of culture, so that everyone can get a chance to get into a relationship, raise children, have children to raise them, and move forward. So, I mean, it's extremely convenient. I wouldn't have to want to kill someone to marry my wife, and then kill other people who are trying to get her for themselves. It's so convenient to have marriage, but marriage isn't it's an institution of civilization. So let's say that first. Therefore, because it's an artificial institution, it's very hard to keep an idea than it is to keep something that's not an idea, that's tangible, like a tree or even a car, for that matter. Marriage is an idea, and so therefore, when people are getting into marriages, they have an expectation, and then when they're getting out of marriages, what they have to deal with is the disappointment of that expectation on both sides: disappointment in self, disappointment in the other person, and disappointment with the marriage. So that's three things that are disappointed when it begins to fall apart. The self part is one part, like, well, could I have done more? Should I have been a better husband or wife? And the other part is the same question. And the marriage part is, how did we fail? What did we do that made this happen? That's sometimes difficult. because it's a lot easier to say what you did to me as opposed to what did we do in this marriage. And when I work with couples, and I work with couples all the time in my town because there's a high divorce rate here, is I try to get to see them as look at that we part in this relationship. It's no individual fault necessarily.
Yeah.
Even if someone went outside of the marriage romantically, it's not necessarily a fault because we're not fundamentally designed for long-term marriage. We're designed to essentially to have children and then have children with other people, as many as possible, really. And we've stopped all that with civilization. That's very convenient that we've done that. But the drive to stay together, ultimately, and this is the part I'm going to let you chime in on, is friendship. Friendship is the most enduring relationship that we have. Not love, not romance, and certainly not lust.
Yeah.
It's friendship. And I've had friends my entire life. I'm sure you have too. And we might have many lovers. We might have many husbands or wives. We might have many, I've had one, thankfully. But I'm saying that but I fully appreciate that friendship. And that's why when I talk about marriage or when I talk about people getting into marriages, I ask young couples when I'm working with them if they need to see me, are you guys friends of each other? Would you, if you weren't getting married, would you still want to be each other's friends? And if they say, oh, absolutely, they're good. If they say, we don't know, we haven't thought about that yet, there might be trouble.
Yeah. Because that's where the long term aspect of the relationship comes in, um, you, where you're friends with each other and you enjoy each other's company and you share likes and dislikes and you want to do things together, and companionship.
Well, I think you want to do things together, but I also think that when you have a friendship, I know if I'm doing something and I'm maybe if I've gone to an art show or something, I say to myself, my wife would love this. I would love this more if she was here with me, loving this with me, loving this.
Yeah.
There's a moreness to it when you have that kind of a relationship with someone. But it's okay. I can always tell her about it later on and say you would have loved this. But it just makes it more when you have that relationship. And to me,
Absolutely.
that's what friendship means to me. That things have more meaning when you're doing them with that person.
Absolutely, and I think you see that with you that experience with good friends, that have been in your life, and where you want, when you're experiencing something good, you want them to be there to experience it with you. So what advice would you give, Ashok? How do men, women who have gone through a divorce, how do they find their bearings again? And because for a lot of people who go through this life change, it's very traumatic. They go through a lot of trauma.
Well, thank you for saying that word. Because it is traumatic, and
Yes.
it's traumatic because of shame. A lot of people when they get married, um, unfortunately, I was the best man at a wedding in 2017, and the marriage lasted for 13 months. 13 months, and I was the best man. So I feel terrible that I was in this situation. But so what I'm trying to say is that when people get into marriage and then it doesn't work out, there's often a lot of shame. And the most important aspect that I have to help people with is forgiveness. And it does not mean forgiveness necessarily of the other person or the we part. It's forgiveness of self.
Yeah.
Because the disappointments that think, I was supposed to be a good husband, I was supposed to be a good wife, my marriage broke down, what did I do wrong? And that can be sometimes very shameful. And the other issues with that, and I don't mean to pry into your experience personally, but the other issue with that is people may not initially understand why a marriage, that everyone maybe says, wow, you guys are great, no, we want to be like you.
Yeah.
And then you got to tell people, well, no, you don't want to be like us because we're separating, we're going to get a divorce.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's very hard for other people to understand why someone is making a decision to end their marriage, and that can cause shame.
Yeah.
Even if the person has no reason to feel shame, that can still make them feel like
Yeah.
their culture around them hasn't quite understood or accepted that situation. And so what I have to spend a lot of time helping with couples or individuals who are going through that is helping them with their self-forgiveness.
And I
Because
think that goes with just that goes with everything, right? Um, that forgiveness with yourself, not just it just doesn't have to do with a divorce. It has to do with just life, right? You're imperfect people, accepting yourself with all your imperfections, and just realizing that it's okay to be imperfect. It's okay to make mistakes, and it's okay to get up and uh, you know just go and make more mistakes. It's being termed as mistakes, but they're all just experiences with different outcomes, and not necessarily the outcome that you had thought of 20 years ago, or 30 years ago, or 15 or 5 years ago, or in your friend's case 13 months ago. When you actually start to live with someone, the purpose of life is to find peace, joy, happiness, contentment. Uh, Life has a different purpose, but when different experiences bring in chaos, or you have tried, and there's a shelf life for a relationship, and if it ends, and then the misery, the unhappiness, that's just what life is. You are supposed to evolve and experience different things, and just, what, keep moving forward.
well, what you're saying is kind of profound, Simon, because if you think about it, evolution is a series of mistakes.
Yeah.
So if you take a horse and then one day nature makes a horse with a neck that's a little bit longer, and then it makes another mistake and makes it a little bit longer, within a number of years, you've suddenly got a giraffe. Now, a giraffe isn't a mistake, but the only way you can get a horse to look like a giraffe is for nature to make a mistake. And so evolution by itself, if people believe in evolution, some don't, of course, is a series of mistakes that are continually evolving. So we, if we weren't around, we'd still be monkeys, right? And so we are the evolution or the extension of primates, which is what monkeys are. So when I look at errors or mistakes, especially my own, I think, great, what am I going to learn from this? What new information is going to happen if I look at this moment and I don't conclude it's a mistake until the end of the story? Do you know Jackson Pollock? He's a
No.
painter, and his paintings are beautiful. I love his paintings, but he painted by pouring paint on the floor on a canvas. And so I'm pretty sure he went into his art room one day and spilt some paint on the floor and looked at it and said, "Oh my gosh, a new technique!" And then he started a phenomenal body of work that essentially involved spilling paint on the floor.
Yeah.
A mistake turned into a beautiful form of art that is now famous across the world. And I'm a bit of a painter too. I also do this accidental painting, I call it. But it's about deliberately trying to make mistakes and then finding something interesting in that. So I think we need to be, maybe the word mistake is a mistake in itself.
Exactly. I think it's just that the connotation that it's a negative word, but perhaps it's not really a negative word. It's just a different outcome than what you expected.
Well, I prefer the word, if we're going to talk about mistake, I prefer the word error. An error is where something literally has gone wrong. We have to understand how it went wrong and why it went wrong. And the classic story with that is the black box in the airplane. And when the airplane crashes, they have to find the black box. And of course, it always comes down to pilot error, which means that it wasn't the machine that caused the crash, it was the pilot. And there's lots of terrible stories about that. But I think error is something that we do understand. And I'm a doctor, and I have to make sure I don't make errors in my practice. And if I do make an error, then it can be a terrible situation. So we
Yeah.
work really, really, really hard to not have errors. But mistakes happen all the time, especially in my line of work, where I might say something to somebody and it wasn't the right thing to say, or but
Or
it's
perceived
always
differently as well.
exact my point. And then sometimes those mistakes become the most valuable lessons that we learn, especially in so many things, in science, in art, and even in my line of work. And I think mistakes need to be embraced. And when people get married, imagine someone saying my marriage was a mistake. Well, I would kind of say to them, well, your marriage was an experience that didn't turn out the way you thought it might, but maybe you grew as a result of that, and maybe you grew as a result of that experience, and there'll be lots to learn. So the next relationship that you're in will be much healthier for you
Yeah,
and healthy for that person too. And if you can find that health, maybe you can go back to your original partner and say, look, our marriage wasn't a mistake, it was an experience. Our streams went in different directions, went into different oceans. But
yeah,
now that we're in separate oceans, can we be friends again? And sometimes that's a miracle that can happen.
yeah. I mean, I'm, you know, I so much of so many of these things. Happiness is a choice. I feel you choose it, to want to be happy, irrespective of what is happening in your life. I think um, choosing for I think forgiveness, it is something you choose to do, that regardless of the outcome not being what you expected, regardless of choices being choices which were made, which were not the best choices, perhaps for two people together, you choose to forgive. And at the same time, you forgive. I feel you forgive because you need to forgive. I think you forgive others when you forgive yourself for your mistakes. Then it's easier for you to forgive others as well.
I think that's very true. And I think that when we find a place to accept ourselves,
Yeah.
it's easier to accept others. But I think, I think I mostly agree with what you're saying about happiness as a choice. But I think the only thing I would add to that, not to be disagreeable, is to look for the choice in unhappiness. And so if I went on a trip with my friends and it was a camping trip and the whole time it rained, I would say, well, let's play board games and card games and let's talk and let's play music and we'll enjoy ourselves in the tent. Let's look for a way to choose enjoyment in the situation that we probably wanted to spend most of our time canoeing or outside of the tent. Look for the happiness in situations, and guess what? It's often there just to be taken.
And there's a lot of happiness in just nothingness.
There's a lot of happiness in just a state of being, and I work with a number of people on LinkedIn, Pam Brinkler, and a number of people like that who are very interested in the state of being and
Yes.
finding meaning in that. I just finished a show with Nikki Vinogradov, and we talked about the meaningfulness of mindfulness,
Yeah.
and that for him, mindfulness meant meaning. And I think finding the meaning in something can take stillness, it can take quietness, it can take peacefulness and contentment. And when you can find that place, that can really fortify your sense of harmony within yourself,
Yeah.
which then comes out and is shared with other people as peace.
Ashok, going back to your suggestion to people who are going through this life change, what would you suggest for them?
Well, I would always suggest people, let's assume that they don't have children, first of all. Because if they have kids, they're going to have to be in each other's lives for the rest of their lives, as long as those children especially if those children are young. I think that what a couple has to do is to try to minimize the hostility that they have towards each other. Because hostility doesn't help them. It doesn't help them as individuals. It doesn't help their relationship. And it does not help the kids if they have kids. If they can manage the hostility, which might be coming from the shame or the embarrassment of the loss of the relationship, there might be an egregious reason why they broke up. There might have been an affair or a business transaction or something nasty that happened. But if they can begin to work with the sense of hostility, and I'm emergent about that when I'm working with couples. Your anger is not going to help us move forward. Your rage or resentment or revenge is not going to help us move forward. And, and that tends to be the biggest hurdle that people have, because especially in North America, everybody wants their day in court. They want that. And quite frankly, and a lot of my practice is lawyers, by the way. And so, and divorce lawyers is that, they don't want their day in court. They just want to feel happy again. They just want to feel loved again. They just want to feel safe and content again. And I think that managing that anger for me is the key to begin to get all that cloudy stuff out of the way, so that two people who used to love each other can find some camaraderie, some friendship again. And if they can't, that's okay. I don't force people to be friends if they can't be, but at least be civil.
Be
If you
civil.
can be civil to each other, that's a whole lot better than two people feeling very hostile and aggressive with each other, so they can't even be pleasant with each other, even in a fake way, when they have to meet each other at their kids' graduations and these kind of things.
A lot of people say that we are staying in marriages because of our children, but then, um, in hindsight, there's so much hostility, there's so much anger, there's so much fighting happening in those environments. There's abuse, there's just, putting each other down. Uh, there's so much of these negative emotions that you're destroying your children's state of mind, anyways.
Right, exactly my point. And if we realize that children, especially young children, but children of any age, are like sponges for emotions, and they're sponging that up as much as they can and learning from it.
Yeah,
And children who are raised in families that have a lot of tension and aggression, that goes into them.
yeah.
And that might make them anxious, it might make them depressed, it might even make them aggressive, or it might make them delinquent. And these are kids who are stealing something from the local shop, and when the cops bring them home, it turns out that there's some trouble going on at the house as well. I'm not blaming anyone. This is not about blame. This is about understanding why these things happen.
Realization. I mean, instead of, again, I do a lot of introspection. I feel there's only one person in this world I can change, and that's myself. And I cannot change my children, I cannot change my parents, and I cannot change anyone, my spouse or anyone else. I can only change myself. And as long as that change is something um, which is going to put me in a better place, which is going to be better for me, I make that change happen. And instead of worrying about what the wrongs, what my ex-husband's wrongs were, or the mistakes that he made, the things that he screwed up, I am going to focus on what have I done, what was my contribution,
Right.
right? Well, okay, so this is what I did, which went against the nurturing of the relationship. So, okay, is that something that's beneficial to me or not? you know should I change this attribute of mine? Should I work? Will it bring more peace to me if I change that attribute of mine? So I just feel that, we can just focus on ourselves so we can be better for ourselves. Because when we are better for ourselves, like you said, our children are sponges and they are constantly sucking in that energy from us. And I feel, I just wish so many of these realizations I had, you know, much earlier in life. But life is, I guess, I'm exactly where I was meant to be, and the experiences are were meant to be. And I guess right now who I am is a product of, you know, all those different decisions with those different outcomes. And some outcomes were good, some were not. And, but, it is what it is.
Well, I think sometimes we reach realizations in our life that may or may not coincide with where we are at in our life. And I remember telling my first girlfriend when I was 8 that I loved her. And she was 12, by the way, so you don't need to. That's enough. That's enough. And she was a lovely person. And I never saw her again because my family left to come to Canada shortly after that. See, we only had a summer of love. And I think we held hands. And I told her how much I loved her, and she professed her love for me too. And then we were whisked away, to Canada. And I remember despising her. Not because we said we would never see each other. I just couldn't handle losing her. And I remember not liking her. And there's no reason for me not like her. We just could never be together. Not only were we a bit of an age discrepancy at that time, but we were in different countries now,
Yeah.
and I would never see her again. And I've always wondered what would happen if I could just see her today and say, "Look, I'm sorry that I felt." And I never communicated my anger. I'm sorry I felt angry when I was 8 at us having to be separated because I couldn't conceive of that experience. And I think that for me is the key, is to be able to conceive of the experience while we're in it. And that's such a hard thing to do because our emotions saturate us and
Yeah.
make us react a certain way. But then if we can step back from them enough, not to negate them, but to step back from them enough so we can see them and say, okay, these are my feelings, but this is in fact is how I think and feel about this. And that can give you control. And when you have control, you can be civil. You can actually be civil and maybe even friendly with someone that you had a failed relationship with. And that's a powerful message, I think. And I began to have a sense of that when I was 8 years of age.
Well, absolutely. I think, everything is a choice. Some of the biggest realizations for me, um, in these past few years, have been, one of them that I think, you know my children and the lessons that they have been teaching me, and the realization that my children have not come into this world where I constantly tell them, do this, do that, go on this, journey, or do, to select this for your career, or do this or do that. Instead, my children have come as mirrors to teach me, because I can see, um, I can see a certain aspect of my own image in them, and learn from that.
Exactly. Being a parent is a second chance to grow up again.
And also realize that just because you're a parent, A, you're not perfect. B, you're still going to make mistakes. C, it's okay to put your ego aside and to learn from your children, because they are trying to teach you these lessons. And when you're not learning, or when they feel unheard, when you're not listening to them, you're just so busy talking, 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 that you can't hear what they are wanting to tell you, that's when they get off grid. Just so many lessons. I mean, that's been one of the lessons. One of the lessons has been that, when you reach, it's okay to reach the end of journeys. And then, you don't have to just keep trying to do the same thing and same thing and same thing until you succeed. I think different experiences which we experience in our life, different doors that are knocked on or closed, and different things that are happening. They're just telling you that perhaps that wasn't your path.
Not everything is meant to succeed. If you look at nature, nature is terrible at that. Many things that that grow in nature don't succeed. Even in the animal kingdom, like fish in the ocean, very few that are born live to become an adult. And so I think nature isn't trying to succeed; it's just trying to move on. And I think in relationships, and that's what kind of we're talking about today, when we develop tolerance and patience and love and forgiveness, then we can begin to move on with the people around us, but more importantly with ourselves. And once we can begin to recognize that we're now moving again, we're moving forward in our life, then that can allow us to feel more patient, and we're growing again. And human beings are designed to keep growing. I think that's part of our basic condition,
Yeah.
and that's probably never going to stop. And that's why it's so important for the individual to find the way to keep growing. And I think that's what you're doing. I see you doing that.
I'm just, I think this has been like the hardest lesson that, you're ingrained with this. Don't give up, to just keep trying until you succeed. I think, when you come across a door which is closed, it's okay for you to backtrack and perhaps try a different, um, just like you're in a maze. If you're trying to go in a certain and you come at a dead end, just turn around and try, uh, you know, uh, try another direction. Perhaps that was never meant to be for you, but
I spoke to a woman in Newfoundland actually. She was 80 and she loved to go fishing in a pond. And she had the knack of being able to catch more fish than anybody else. And I asked her one day, I said, "How are you able to catch so many fish?" She said, "Easy. If I cast that out a few times and don't get a bite, I move somewhere else." And she only ever fishes in places that she's catching the fish. I thought, how obvious is that? But this was her trick,
yeah,
to not waste time fishing in a place where the fish weren't there. And I think that's a great motto for life. Find where life is biting, find where you'll catch life, find where you'll be able to reel it in, because life is about moving forward and being and serving yourself enough so that you feel that patience and contentment to move forward, not in a selfish way because you'll always share it.
yeah,
But she had this wonderful, simple philosophy that I thought, what a great idea that is. Just fish where the fish are biting.
yeah. uh, you know just love yourself first, and that is something which a lot of people are not taught. Love yourself enough, because then with the overflow you can just nurture everything which is around you, which is surrounding you, instead of when your own cup is half full and you're wanting to give to others, you're not able to, and it stresses you and it burns you out because you did not have enough to give. But when you take care of yourself first and you reach the brim, and then from the overflow, you just, create this, it just keeps overflowing and you just keep spreading and nurturing.
Exactly. Once you find that ocean of self-love, then you can share that with everybody else.
And that's, I think that right there is just extremely powerful. So we didn't get a chance to speak about some of the other things because when we start talking, we are both very philosophical and we just uh, we build ourselves up and just have these amazing conversations. Uh, I think my podcast is just, that's what it is for me. It's a place to, talk and build relationships and just personal growth, and hopefully in that process, um, my uh, my husband's ex-husband's sister-in-law, she was telling me that her mother, who is in Delhi, uh, regularly watches my show, and she makes sure that she watches every single episode. And I'm like, that is just so cool that whoever feels that they can resonate, or perhaps there's a message in there for them, and whoever's life we are able to touch. I think that's what the show is all about. So we have reached our hour, Ashok, and so it's time to say, as much as we are enjoying this philosophical conversation, it's time to say goodbye to everyone. And with Ashok, you will see us again. Gosh, Ashok, we're going to be back. It will be 2022. So you'll see us again, and wishing everyone a wonderful night, and hope. Ashok, I will let you end this one because I will still be here.
Well, I think all I want to say to our viewing public is thank you so much for supporting us, watching us, and supporting Saima in her wonderful effort to do this heart-to-heart podcast. It does touch people's lives, and I think it's an empathic undertaking that spreads love, and I think that's a wonderful message for all of us. Thank you so much, Saima.
Well, thank you, everyone. Take care, and thank you for being here. So we'll